Bachelor of Screen Production is a partnership between Excelsior College and Sydney Film School. Excelsior's pedigree in the academic world is second to none. Sydney Film School, we teach filmmakers how to make films. So in this course you get both the theory and the practical merged together so that you understand what it is to not only tell stories but actually execute them so that you can deliver those to an audience. Excelsior has a wonderful campus, including a theatre, and students study there for some of their subjects, and 25 minutes away they study at Waterloo Studios, which is the home of Sydney Film School. Waterloo Studios is a fully functioning production studio. We have sound stages, edit suites, rehearsal rooms, screening rooms, and the equipment that we use is professional. We have partnerships with a whole range of different professional suppliers. We've put everything under the one roof. If students are interested in making films, there's no better place than studying with us because we bring all the elements of film together. Between Excelsior and Sydney Film School, we have an extensive network of professional relationships that don't just span for Sydney, they actually span all over the world. I wish I was 18 again and I could start this program. It has the right balance between the theoretical aspects of filmmaking, the understanding of storytelling, but also the philosophical elements of what are you going to make films about. We effectively push you off the cliff. We get you to fly. We get you to go out and make films in an incredibly supportive and an inspiring environment. And we really have one saying, which is this: your vision. We want you to make the films only you can make. We get you to understand who you are, why you want to tell these stories, how to execute the stories, and ultimately how to make the film. And here's the greatest thing: share your stories with the world.
Giant I've ever seen. I'm gonna trust God's word.
Aren't you afraid? We're afraid of not, sir.
I think it's the fact that you know you're meant to be significant.
You as a human being are designed as a future-oriented creature.
We just want to be impactful.
There's something that the author knows that I don't know yet.
Hello, and thanks to Excelsior College. Welcome to a very special interview as part of the Connect 20 Media and Art Summit. I'm Mel Wade, and joining me from Auckland is Luke Weston.
Yay! Thanks, Mel. Yeah, coming up in a few moments, we're joined by Danielle Redford of Heritage Films in a conversation with Brian Bird and Jason Pamer. They're exploring their success in episodic TV and faith-based feature documentaries.
Now, many of you may know these two gents. Jason Pamer is the producer and writer of The Heart of Man, which has been released in theatres in over 30 countries. And joining him is Brian Bird, executive producer and co-creator of the top-rated Hallmark Channel series When Calls the Heart. Now prepping its 8th season and executive producer of the spin-off series When Hope Falls.
So good. Well, we really hope you enjoy this conversation. With thanks to Excelsior College, here's Danielle Redford.
Jason Pamer and Brian Bird, thank you so much for joining us for this time. Thanks for jumping on a Zoom call all the way down to Australia. It's quicker than a flight, so I guess that's a bit of a win. I have a bunch of questions that we can work through, but I'd love, before we kick off, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. Jason, do you want to go ahead?
The only one that needs to be introduced because the other one's known already. That's fair. I'm a producer, writer, live in Seattle, Washington with my wife and 2 kids. Been in the industry for a little over a decade. And over the last 5 years, been able to work with this guy, Brian Bird, on a number of projects. We have our hands on 2 to 3 projects, it feels like, at all times together. So it's a real gift. I've been able to work with amazing crews all over the world, work with your crew and distributing the last film. And it's been a real joy. I mean, I've touched every culture, sat at nearly every table, and tried almost every meal. And so it's been a wild ride, and I wouldn't trade the last 10 years. And if I can, I'd like the next 10, 15, 20 years to continue to do this work. It's highly creative, and it blends all types of industry. And sitting at the convergence of producing, you touch all of it. And And so that's one thing that I love about producing. And then the writing gives us different fulfillment, different opportunity to touch the material at its infancy, to even give birth to it in that way. So I love the role of producer writer. I love where I live. I love that it gets me all around the world. And hopefully I can continue making stuff with this guy and distributing with people like you.
That's a package we'll take. I'll speak for the company. Thanks, Jason. And Brian, we've got a little hint of who you are in the background there, and other
absolutely.
things.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for having us at the conference. I mean, we love sharing, where we've been and sharing some war stories, sharing some of the shortcuts, some of the learnings, the lessons. I've been doing this for about 35 years, and my family still wants me to come home at night. They still love me. I still only have one wife of 39 years. So somehow, some way, we've been able to get through that. But it's been exciting to work with Jason on several projects now. But the one that you folks down under know most probably at least from us, is The Heart of Man. And it was just such an honor to executive produce that with Jason and Jens and the rest of their team. It's the kind of film I think that has made a huge difference in people's lives, and for the kingdom, for the betterment of their lives. And I always try to, in all the projects that I do, whether it be The Heart of Man or some new ones that Jason and I are working on, or When Calls the Heart, which I know you folks know in Australia, New Zealand very well, my TV series. The Case for Christ is another one that I did a few years ago. I love kingdom value kinds of projects. And when anybody ever comes to me and asks me, do you want to be involved in this? I have a couple of check marks that I have to tick off. And first of all, does it have kingdom value? And if it does, then I can check that off. Second of all, do I love the story? Does the storyline or the material, the idea, does it light my personal jets? And if I can check that off. And the third thing is, if my skills match the project, if what I can offer matches what the project needs, then I'll hit that third check mark. And for me, if I get those three check boxes checked, I say yes. And you have to be a yes person in this business. I really believe that. If I can hit those three yeses, then I say yes. And then I just make a quick prayer and I say, okay, God, I've said yes. Now you figure out the rest. Because we're in an impossible business, and the only way the impossible becomes possible is you chip away at the impossibility a little every day until you're on a set and somebody is shouting action, and you say, how did we get here? So that's sort of how I roll. And so I love hearing from Jason when he calls and says, hey, there's this project that we might be able to get our hands on. Are you interested? I love saying yes to those kinds of projects.
I love that, chipping away at the impossible bit by bit every day. That should be more comforting to me as a young producer, but it does sound familiar. And so if it's worked for you for a while, that's a really great segue into a question I have for you, Jason. Thanks, Brian, for those three yeses. I think they're a really good guideline. And even for all of us to be developing what our yes is, what's our big yes, what's our emphatic yes. Right. But Jason, you've worked across formats and stories of many different shapes. Your slate doesn't take one form. It's not one version of traditional media. How do you know when a project is a right fit for you? What are your yeses? What are you looking for?
Probably less spiritual than Brian's. Maybe not. Maybe just framed differently. But I think, when I watch it, would this be something I would want to consume? This probably goes to his light the jets thing. Like, is it something that I would get excited to go, curl up in the media room and watch? And so that's kind of the first thing. I think, a unique take on it is something that Jens is my producing partner and I in Cypher Studios, we want to bring to bear on any of the material, but is there a unique POV within this materials or something that the world hasn't seen yet in this way? And then can we bring to bear our palate and our taste buds and then bring a bigger team around it that can think the same way?
Mm.
So is there that unique thing about it that it can be perceived differently than maybe, because, you know, you can tell the same story a lot of different ways. And I think if the different way is clear to me, then I think it's something worth pursuing. And then, you know, as a producer, I'm always thinking about, like, okay, I got to like it. Will the marketplace like it? Is there an appetite out there? Is there a buyer? Is there a financier? Is there an investor? So I'm thinking equal parts. Does it light me up? And does it light someone else up? Because I'm about to take this to somebody else. Could be a Brian, could be another investor, could be a streamer, could be another distributor. And is it going to light them up? So yeah, does it light me up? Is it something I would want to watch? I love, you know, Jens and I love true stories. There's something really beautiful about that. So biopics will have our ear maybe a little bit easier. Yeah, leave it there.
Good. I guess it's that question of personal taste as well, and cultivating those instincts, which is something that takes time, takes the wins, it takes some of the big no's on the other side as well.
Yeah, and Brian, you know, I've learned a lot from him. One, you know, the yes, be a yes man, and then also the power of no. And I think those two things can be both true at the same time. And that's something that in this season right now, we've been able to say yes a lot, which has put us in a really beautiful position. And now it's exercising the power of no strategically, so that you can execute on the yeses you've committed to, you know?
I think that's a really interesting point, Jason, particularly for emerging creatives and storytellers who there's often a lot of pressure to jump and to say all of the yeses so that you don't miss the opportunity. But that can lead you down paths that actually take you further from defining that taste, defining that perspective. For both of you, what would your thoughts be for people who might be in the first few years of their career and they're looking to cultivate that instinct and balance both the creative passion and the pragmatism that is necessary to managing projects?
Well, I think, you know, beyond sort of figuring out how to say yes to what works, you know, one thing I've said to new voices, younger people who are trying to get established or sort of break through the barriers that this business can put up for them is, you know, sometimes you can be, you know, try to be so unique that that you're not commercial, right? And I think that part of why I have learned over the years to say yes to as many things as I can say yes to is because most of the time they don't happen, right? You almost have to put 10 things into motion for one or two to actually happen. And so that doesn't mean that you say yes to anything by any means. You do have to have some taste buds about this. But I said to my son Cameron, who had a garage band one time, he played their demo songs for me, and I listened to all of them, and I said, you know, that third one right there is very memorable, and I really love that one. And he said, well, that's the one where we feel like we're selling out. And it's not as indie as we want to go for. And I said, well, let me tell you one thing. I can guarantee that unless you do songs that are memorable for people, you will never sell out. You will never sell out any venue, right? You don't want to be a sellout? Okay, well then you're never going to sell out a venue because you're so unique, so idiosyncratic that you can't build a following. And as people who are trying to be storytellers, my goal is as many eyeballs as possible on what I do. I don't want to just reach a tiny little cluster of people with what I do. I want to hit as many people as possible. It's not only good business, right, for people, because this is a very risky business. When you get people that come in with money or stakes or leverage and invest in you as a storyteller, you have to be successful. because you'll never talk to them again if you crash and burn with those resources. So, the goal to be as successful and commercial as possible is really important. And so I would say, to younger voices who are trying to, pave their own way, absolutely, you have to have a distinct voice in what you're trying to do, and you have to be about something, right? You do have to, what is your why in this business, right? Mark Twain said there's the two most important days in a person's life are the day they were born and the day they figure out why they were born, right? We have to have a why, a personal why. What is our life about? What do we want to communicate in this giant media conversation? So if you're trying to, be so distinct that you're not going to reach as many ears and eyes as possible, you run the risk of not, being successful or being a one-hit wonder, right? You get one thing done, and then, and there are a lot of those people out there who become one-hit wonders. And so the goal to me is, if my why is that I'm supposed to communicate, I'm supposed to be a storyteller and bring food to people's souls with my story and my storytelling, I can't be a one-hit wonder. I have to have a sustainable path in my, and if it's my why, it's supposed to be what I'm about my whole life. And so that's, to me, one of the big lessons for younger people that are coming up. You be sustainable, say yes to as many things as you can, so that the power of no works. This is something you have to do with kids too, that when you have children. You can't say no so much that it has no effect, right? You have to say yes as many times as you can, so that when you do have to say no, it actually works.
Jason, any thoughts on the back of that?
I got caught up in it. I'm not even sure if the original question. I got caught up in it. I mean, listen, I think Brian and I's friendship and relationship, it's a Hollywood story in and of itself. I mean, any young producer, pursue someone like this and don't take the no's that they give you as the final answer. Because if I would have done that, I wouldn't be on this call with Brian. We wouldn't be just getting off a 2-hour writing call. I remember the first time I reached out to him, I didn't get an answer. I reached out a couple more times, didn't get an answer. Finally got an answer, flew all the way to Los Angeles to do a screening with him of a doc we were working with. And we're going to meet him for breakfast, the director and I. So we're sitting in a restaurant and we're waiting for him. He comes in, and 20 minutes into it, he gets this really big production call he's got to take. So he exits the restaurant. And we're thinking, he'll come back. Most people do when they leave a meeting. And 20 minutes comes 30, 40. We're looking out the window like, did he just jet? We finally paid for him. And then we get up and walk out. And he's in his car. He's on a call. And he's like, just totally, LA. And we're like, all right. And, he could talk about that, because that's kind of a cool, actually, it's a cool genesis of One Calls the Heart, actually, that he was getting fixed in that moment. But, we didn't let that deter us. We kind of stayed on his radar, and we're able to bring things of quality to him. And again, he's refined that yes enough to know when something is that. And the couple of things we did bring to him were, and then it was just a matter of finding the right time in the schedule. And then you get one piece of momentum, and then you get another, and then all of a sudden you find yourself going, headlong down the hill. And the hope is that you can continue that, right? You can continue to find more hills. So I would just say, don't take no for an answer, and keep going, but be listening the whole way, because there will be things along the way that will, you should be listening to make pivots, to make changes, to scrap something if it needs to be scrapped. That keeping your ear there is really important.
That raises a question for me around the idea of mentorship and the role that mentorship plays. In Australia, mentorship is much more of a unspoken concept. We're not very good at speaking about our feelings all the time. And so we have these more casual, influential relationships. It takes quite a lot to say to someone, would you be my mentor? And I think that that's actually an area of cultural cringe that we probably should get over and move into a bigger space of embracing the beauty and power of a really healthy long-term mentorship relationship. How has mentorship, both in the giving and the receiving of mentorship in both of your careers, played a role in your personal and your professional development?
Well, I'd love to answer this one first. So my first cup of coffee in the big leagues was when I was 25 years old, and my wife's great uncle, a guy named Don Ingalls, who was a writer, producer, sort of during the golden age of television in America, and you would recognize everything he touched and put his hands on. My wife cornered him and I was a journalist when I first started my career. I went to journalism school. I was working in newspaper work and magazine work early during that part of my life. And she cornered Uncle Don and said, "You should read my husband's, newspaper articles and magazine articles." And he was kind enough to say yes, whether he was guilted into it or he was just a good guy, probably a little bit of both. He said yes. And he got back to me. He said, "You're a really good writer. Have you ever thought about television, writing for TV?" And I said, "No, honestly, I haven't. I'm a big consumer, but I've never thought about actually getting involved in the middle of that process." And he said, "Well, you should." And he gave me some scripts to read, and he gave me some books to read to sort of do my own homework. And I wrote a spec script of the television show that he was producing at that time. And he was good enough to read it. And he said, "We can't use this one because we can't take projects in over the transom." But he said, "We want to call you in next year if we get picked up for another season and have you pitch some story ideas." And he was good to his word. That happened. I brought some story ideas in for that show. It was an old show called Fantasy Island, which you guys are way too young to even know what that is. But it was a big hit on ABC in the US. And so I had my first chance to write a TV episode because they liked the stories that I pitched. And he said, "Brian, nepotism can open a door, but your chops have to keep the door open." And he also said to me, he said, "Somebody opened a door for me when I was your age. And they made me promise to leave the door open for somebody else." And he said, "I'm exacting that same promise from you right now. I'm opening a door for you. You have to leave it open for somebody else." And to be honest with you, my whole career, I've been trying to fulfill that promise. I feel like mentorship is so important, not only from a spiritual standpoint, a faith standpoint, but also just a personal value standpoint. If I believe I have good values and good ideas for the world, why would I not want to clone myself in somebody else? Why would I not want to pass those ideas down to the next generation? And so my relationship with Jens and Jason started out like that, but now we're peers. Now we're actually working together. And I would just go fix a fence with these young guys, right? Because one, they keep me young. I love their energy. And I feel like I have the heart of a 17-year-old, even though I'm a wounded, scarred up veteran of the media wars for 35 years. But I also think their taste buds are fantastic. And I love the work they do. So I actually want them to write in my pages too. I want to be an open book. And for young people getting into the business, and Jason alluded to this, that, you have to listen to notes that you get from people who have earned the right to give them, right? We've been to the wars. We've been in the big leagues. We have the right to offer those notes. And I, in return, want my young, energetic young partners to write in my pages too, and to keep me fresh, to challenge me, not to get stuck in my ways. It's an important process, mentorship. for both the mentor and the mentee, because you end up mentoring each other, to be honest.
Yeah, I love that. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Jason, how about you?
I mean, that's really beautifully said. I think there's so much precedent for it as well, and historical context. One of the things I heard once that I just love, that in the Near Ancient East, you know, they had staffs. It was agricultural. They had these big staffs that were their tool of sorts. And I didn't ever pick this up on any of the reads of, you know, the ancient Old Testament texts when they would talk about these. But a historian talked about, they would carve their story in at the top of the staff and work their way down over their life. They'd be carving in major moments, major things that happened. At the end of their life, they would give that staff, and that would be a thing given to the next generation. And it would remind them when that, you know, crop went away or that harvest didn't come, or they could look at the staff of the person before them and remember that God, that person that walked with them was going to be faithful. And that was kind of as a religious context. But I think that's one thing that Brian's just done, is hopped in the trenches. There's different types of mentoring. The one that Brian is at least employed with us is just hops in. He was on every call, you know, on the calls, negotiating live for the Heart of Man stuff. Then this writing thing that we just entered into, I had a lot of trepidation because I felt pretty confident and competent in the producing side, and never had jumped fully into the writing, kind of danced around it in many ways over the years. And Brian and I had many conversations of me trying to get out of it, you know, and Brian was always there to encourage. No, I think, to his mentor's point, I see something in you, and I wouldn't waste my time if I didn't trust me on this. And so it was a trust thing. It was like, I mean, he doesn't even know fully the anxiety I had before about doing it. And we're getting paid pretty well to do it. And there's that relationship. And, you know, we're going to be producers on this too. So there's that expectation. There was just quite a bit. And I would not have done it without his forceful but gentle prodding of like, no, you can. In fact, we can. And let's go do it together. So again, I think that version of mentoring, of passing on the story, the staff, and then walking with someone through a field and doing the tilling together is a real great gift. It takes way more effort than hopping on a video call and, you know, or teaching a class. That's good and should happen. It's way different to mentor in the fields, in the city gates, out in the Badlands.
I really value those thoughts on mentorship. I love as well that it's a cyclical process, that no matter what point you are in your career, you don't have to wait for the 35 years of experience before you can start to be the giver of that gift. And as you've mentioned, Brian, that there's so much to be gained from, although I think you might need to check your sources, because Jason is no longer fitting into the keeping you young category. So you might need to age down.
It's the only card I'm playing right now. Let me keep it for
You got about 2 years.
From my vantage point, it's
like
all young. It's all young. So, and honestly, my goal in our relationship is I hope Jason is far more successful than I have been, and I can count, you know, several young writer, producer folks who have shot past me and are doing much better than I in terms of their careers. And I was there. I got to speak into it. I got to do some of the mentoring for them. And that for me is so gratifying. It's a legacy of mentorship to me that is as valuable as any of the writing or producing credits that I have.
It's really cool.
You know, it's to me, it's just such an obvious thing, right? If you're in the middle of nowhere and you stumble upon a city that you want to settle in, and there are people sitting at the city gates and they've been there a bit, you're going to want to talk to them about which merchants to avoid, which streets to go down, which places I can find rest at. You're going to want to get their insight to know where in the city. And then when you exit the city and you go back out into the wild, they've been there too. And these are the people that you should be talking with. And again, I just think it can't be overemphasized. There's a version of that gatekeeper that sits there at the city gates and talks to people that go in. And there's another one that goes with that person and helps them find things in the city. And Brian has done that time and time again in the industry, which is that city, right? The entertainment industry, which is a perilous place to go in by yourself. I mean, it's tough enough when you go in with your band of people. It's hard enough. You definitely need people that have been around those streets for a long time.
That's a really powerful metaphor. And knowing the roles of both in your life and finding the spaces for those as well. Brian, you mentioned your 35 years and all that you've seen in that time. From the distribution perspective and all of the ramifications in the production space, the conversation has been incessant about change over the past few years. At every corner, we have a conversation about change of the norm and what that means for every layer of this industry. We're in the midst of so many of those conversations on steroids in the midst of the COVID shutdown right now. I'm interested in what has remained fundamentally the same, what never changes in the sea of, I guess, sometimes fear as well over what will happen if theaters change, if streaming takes over.
Right. You know what? How we consume the content ultimately, whether it's, a combination of theatrical and streaming on our little phones and or our home theaters, doesn't matter at all to content producers. None of that matters. In fact, the fact that there is so much more original content being made right now, maybe not right now because everybody's at home, but in this era, the paradigm shift of streaming that has come, Netflix themselves have stated that they want to make 1,000 television shows. And that means original shows. That doesn't mean licensing in, having second helpings of somebody else's show. They'll do that too, but they want to make 1,000 original shows. And they're just one of the streamers. This year, When Calls the Heart was one of 498 television shows made in North America. 498 TV shows. When I was doing the shows that I used to do back in the day, Touched by an Angel, Step by Step, some of the shows from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there might have been 200 shows being made. So there is a gold rush going on right now because of the paradigm shift, right? The gold rush doesn't mean it's any easier to sell those projects. It's still just as hard. In fact, in some ways it can be even more challenging because the personnel at all these gatekeepers, the people at the city gates who have to let you in the door, they're changing. They're constantly changing. They're moving from here to there, and it's revolving revolving chairs, musical chairs, and revolving doors for those folks. So the taste buds are constantly shifting. These people are looking for this today, but tomorrow it might be different, right? So it's still just as challenging to try to sell into that marketplace. But for those who have earned the right to be in the chair, have earned the right to be in the meeting, there is a gold rush going on right now. Story is food. Story is absolutely food. It's soul food. And it's one of the essential things, even in the pandemic. We've been, hearing that, consumption of story has gone up by 30 or 40% during the shelter in place that most of the world has been under. So there's never going to be a shortage of hunger for food, for soul food that we do as storytellers. So, content, is king always. Story is always king. And there will never not be a need for it. And even if IA can, or AI can approximate what we do as storytellers someday, it'll never really work. It'll never really hit the nuance that comes from the human heart and the human soul, either in the need for content, the need for food, or in the ability to produce that food. We are food producers as storytellers and content producers. So I tend to sort of laugh when I hear, people, talking about sort of the crisis of, what are we going to do? Theaters are closed down right now. What are we going to do? No, I'm telling you, it's no different than going into a grocery store and filling your cart up with essential items that you need to survive. I really believe that more than ever. So nothing has changed about the hunger for story. Nothing has changed about that. That will always remain the same. And what is it that every little kid says to their parents when you're putting them to bed at night? Tell me a story. Every kid asks for a story when they're being put to, how come? It's because they're starved to death. We as human beings require story for our sustenance. And I'll even say this, even if you go back into the caveman days, those cave paintings that archaeologists and find on the cave walls, you know what that was for? That was the kids saying, tell me a story. And so the father was painting on the cave wall, right? The story. I really believe in that. I think that's where that comes from. It's passing on the legacy of story. It's always going to be there. It's an essential need of the human soul. And those who know how to do it, those who've been have been called to do it, and have been affirmed by others who have the right to an opinion to do that. It is your why. It's why you're on earth. Just like if you were a farmer and you're producing, food and crops for people. I really believe that.
I'm interested in both of your thoughts on how to protect that identity of storyteller and what it is to be in the midst of, an industry that is basically rejection all the time. And that's okay. That's part of it. But then to feel, I guess, that push on, well, what's the worth of your work? And yet, there's all the emotional responses to that. And yet beyond that, there is so much beauty and so much power. And without story, what are we fighting for? But I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, because I imagine that across your own careers, you've experienced that kind of cycle many times as well.
As much as Brian and I on this call to this conference can encourage you as an artist and a storyteller that you matter, that your work matters, that it inspires other storytellers to tell other stories, that to Brian's point, it is food for the soul. I would say that to whatever degree that matters to you, I would say that is true. On the other hand, you've got some of the greatest artists of all time that never got that affirmation during their time. Van Gogh, for instance, ended his life in a really sad way and was never recognized as the artist he is now, 130 years later. He's considered arguably one of the greatest artists, if not the greatest painter of all time. And that's a thing with art, I think, in general, is the appreciation looking back is much different than in the midst of the art being created. So that is one of those, call it sad realities, but it is a reality, I think, for us. That what we're spending time on today, sacrificing for in the trenches to create, might not get the resonance and the respect and the enjoyment that we're pushing for. There's a little bit of difference, obviously, in our world with the feedback loops that are created and the immediate gratification you can get from creating art and releasing it. That's true. I just think at the same time, we got to hold true as well that some of the greatest artists were not recognized for that in their time. And that's part of the thing about art, right? It's visionary. You're speaking almost to something in the future. Yeah, there's an element of speaking to it in the present, but there's definitely something about it that speaks to the future. So people in the future are going to see it in a way that we don't now. You know what I mean?
It's good.
Yeah, good thought. I mean, look, it's a hard business. There's no doubt that there's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of near misses, right? It can be feast or famine. Absolutely true. I've often thought of our sort of media enterprise as we're just a bunch of gypsies wandering around looking for food. And when we find some, we camp there a while until it runs out, and then we have to go find a new place where there's more food. A band of gypsies doing this, right? It's kind of the nature of the beast. I try to encourage, here's what I try to encourage, people who are struggling artists, is to make sure that the call is true, that your call as an artist is a true call, right? And there are a few ways to figure that out. I really believe that, you know, because I've met a lot of, you know, in my travels, I've met a lot of young writers who were burning, and filmmakers who were burning with desire, like, you know, Salieri and Mozart, you know, to speak their truth, to tell their stories. But they hadn't put the 10,000 hours in, right? They have the burning desire, but as Malcolm Gladwell says in his book Outliers, you know, you can have a spark of genius and sit on your couch eating potato chips and never go anywhere, right? But without putting those 10,000 hours in order to become an expert in what you do. You know, he chronicles the Beatles. They had to play in strip clubs for 8 hours a day doing cover songs for 2 years before they could figure out how to do their own music, right? Sometimes you just have to put the hours in. You have to do the do-it-yourself work. So one of the things I always advise is find 3 champions in your life who will affirm for you that you have the spark of genius that it takes. Because in the age of YouTube, everybody and his brother thinks they're a movie maker or thinks they're a media player. You know, it's unfortunate. The digital revolution has been wonderful, and there's been a democratization of the process, so more people have opportunities, and you can sometimes even be your own distributor, right, of your content. However, not just everybody can do it. It's just true. I believe that we're all made in the image of the author of the universe, and we all have a tiny strand of that DNA in us, but that doesn't mean our strand of DNA is, I'm going to be a movie maker. You might have a strand of DNA in a whole nother field that you're ignoring because it's not as fun, or it doesn't seem as cool as, you know, getting into the media or being a writer or producer or director or whatever, right? So you got to make sure that you are following the strand that you have and not being deluded or delusional, which leads to disappointment and devastation. That's a lot of D words to throw at people, right? That you're pursuing a call that is not your call. There are some of those people out there, right? There's a lot of those people out there. But if you can find 3 champions who have earned the right to their opinions, who are like me, have been in the wars and come back and sort of have been there, done that, and know what they're talking about, if they confirm for you that you have the stranded DNA that it takes, then you have to do it. And it will still be hard and it will still be painful. But if you have 3 champions speak into your life and say, you can do this for a living if you want to, you need that. You need those champions to speak into you. Because if it's your Aunt Connie from Albuquerque telling you you're brilliant, it doesn't count. Sorry. It doesn't count.
Love her, but yeah. It doesn't count.
I love my Aunt Connie.
Yeah.
So good. It'll be hard, but you can do it, and you have to.
You have to.
I like the finality of that.
Yeah, because if you don't pursue the call that you have been called to do and that others confirm in you, then you're selling yourself short, you're selling the world short, and you're selling God short, who made you, right? You're selling them all short if you don't pursue it. But just make sure that you're supposed to follow that call, and it's the call you've been chosen for.
It's good. It's some easy to apply wisdom. There's nothing fluffy about that. I like it a lot. We're coming to the end of the time that we've got, and this has been a real gift to me. Thank you to both of you for just everything that you're sharing. It's a plethora, treasure trove that we'll keep diving into. But I have two questions left, and Jason, I'm going to prep you for this last one, but I really appreciated what you were sharing a few weeks ago about chaos. So I wouldn't mind if we come back to that. But first question is, what are the pieces of art? What are the series? What are the shows or the movies? What are the books what have you guys been enjoying during this season? What's been giving to you?
Other than When Calls the Heart?
Of course.
Okay, I'll pay you for that.
I'll go second then. Yeah. I just finished The Last Dance, 10-part series on Michael Jordan, who growing up was, you know, an icon, right? His image was on all my walls, and that was an interesting way to see that story told in such a, you know, amount of content, to see a crew that, you know, 22 years ago followed that team for that year, that last year that he played for the Bulls. And so that was a fun series to watch. And I watched that with my dad and brothers, right? And then I watched Ozark with my wife. And then I'm watching Up with my kids right now. And I'm watching, you know, I'm just watching all these different types of contents. And I'm watching McMillions on HBO. I think it's HBO. You know, my favorite show, I'll land the plane with this. My favorite show, it could be maybe ever, second to When Calls the Heart, but up there, is Billions. To me, it's arguably the best writing and acting I have seen out there. The writing is so sophisticated, so complex. And I think now, just as I'm getting those reps in with Brian, and I'm seeing how he breaks story and how we're breaking the story together, and just, I mean, I think we each probably put in a couple weeks ago 35 hours each together on calls, going over every line of dialogue, every line of prose, everything, and then going back and then forward and then back again. And so just knowing, getting a greater sense of what goes into that, it just makes me admire that art so much more. So Billions is probably my favorite show, could be ever. And we're in the middle of season 5, 4 episodes into season 5. That's on Showtime. If you want my login, just shoot me an email at cbird@gmail.com.
It's on Stan here in Australia. It's been on my watch list for a while, and I'm yet to tip over, but I think you've just done it.
Oh, it's remarkable.
I can't wait. That's the real joy of a series where you just sit there going, how? Every time. They're the good ones. Brian, how about you?
You know, there are some things that for me, I like to revisit sort of my top favorite movies. I do watch TV shows as well, so I can see what the competition is doing. But I've been recently watching sort of my top 10 favorite movies of all time to try to lift my soul, right? It's such a good meal, such a good, 7-course banquet of food for me, that it primes the pump for me in all the other work that I'm trying to do. And I've said this to many people. I keep 5 great screenplays sitting by my computer, produced movies, not spec scripts from my friends, but 5 great produced movies. And they sit by my computer, and I get new ones for every project I do. And if I ever get stuck when I'm writing, I'll just grab one and I'll dig into it, and I'll say, okay, how did they end this scene? How did they skin these cats, and these challenges? And that becomes my film school, because I didn't go to film school. So great movies, and my top movies, like my favorite movie of all time, Cinema Paradiso. It won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Film in 1989. It's my favorite movie of all time. And if you haven't seen it, it's required viewing for you now. The Mission.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite all-time movies. It has a sequence in it that is the best picture of the cross of any movie ever made.
Yeah.
In any movie ever made.
I've had the privilege of doing a few 6-week, 7-week long masterclasses with Lord David Putnam, and it life-changing. Yeah, absolutely. Chariots of Fire is another one, and On Golden Pond is another one. Life is Beautiful is another one. I love pulling out Rocky and watching Rocky, because that's a movie when I was in college that, picture this, a bunch of college students going together to see the movie Rocky in a theater. It's a picture on a wall.
right? It's color and motion on a big white wall is what you're looking at. And we were out of our seats screaming at the top of our lungs for what was happening. It was make-believe, and we were screaming at the top of our lungs, rooting for that fight, that final fight. That's a really good movie. It got me out of my seat yelling, right? It caused a physical reaction in me. Movies that cause a physical reaction in you, whether you're on your feet or if you're weeping or if you're sobbing or if you're laughing and your gut hurts, those are good flicks, right? The same with television shows. Now, in my day job, I co-create and executive produce a very hopeful, family-friendly show for 7 seasons, going on 8 seasons now. In my nighttime, I don't always watch that kind of content, right? I want to be exposed to what everybody else is doing to learn what not to do, but also how can I learn, what nuances can I learn from what other people do? And there's some amazing content. Now, sometimes you have to take a shower when you're done watching it because it's dark and it's cynical. But there's a show called Breaking Bad that you probably know about. It is one of the most fascinating anti-hero reverse character arc shows that you could ever watch, because it literally is about the it's the hero's quest going from good to bad. It ends horribly. But it's a great cautionary tale about human nature and the nuances of human nature. So anyway, there's lots to see. There's a smorgasbord. There's a show on HBO called Succession, which is amazing. It's an amazing show that is roughly, chronicling Rupert Murdoch's family. I mean, it's sort of it's an homage to Rupert Murdoch's family.
We Aussies are real proud of that exploit on that one.
It's a crazy good show. It's a crazy good show. So anyway, there's lots to see, and I personally encourage people to watch things that prompt a literal physical reaction in them.
I love that.
My friend is watching Succession for the first time on my recommendation a few months back, and so the texts I'm getting from him are all, I jumped out of my seat, I couldn't move, I can't look. And that's some good writing. That's, you want to talk about moving people, physically moving them is not a bad thing to aim for.
Yeah, and as a writer personally, and something I've told Jason, is that you want, when you're writing content, you want to write yourself into such a corner that you personally have no idea how you're going to get out of that corner. But that the characters have to figure it out. And you obviously are the father of those characters or the parent of those characters. So you're giving birth to those characters. So it's ultimately you figuring it out, but you have to not be afraid to write yourself into a massively horrible corner, because that's where all the best drama happens, right?
Yeah, it's good. Not to play it safe.
Yeah, never.
Oh, that's a good list from both of you. It's my weekend sorted. Jason, to bring us on home, I'm going to throw to you. We were talking a few weeks ago about what this time feels like and about what chaos offers us. I'd love for you to expand on that.
Yeah, the ancient Greeks had a concept of chaos that was just the abyss or the space before something came to be, before something came into existence. It wasn't interpreted till much later by Roman philosophers that it was a bad thing, and that we kind of hung on to that version of chaos. But the ancient Greeks saw it as just a time before creation happens, and we see that in the religious text of Genesis 1, the spirit hovering over the deep. Another interpretation is chaos. There's chaos there before the original creation moment. And we find ourselves globally in chaos. Chaos is not going away. And it's not going away for a long time. And it can be argued that we're in a state of chaos, you know, perpetually in the entertainment business, you know, especially as producers. Chaos is always around us. Where you can identify the fear, name it, feel it, taste it, and go through it, on the other side of that is creativity. And where you can become creative in the chaos, that's like, that's the place where the best creativity is shaped, it's formed. So again, present time, Connect 2020, COVID-19 has wrapped itself around the globe. We are in utter chaos. We need to not just forget the fear, look away from the fear. We have to feel it. And for many of us, we can't avoid it. For many of us, we're tasting it in much more of a real way than we would like. And we have to enter and go through that. But then creativity is on the other side of us. You know, in the last great recession in the US in 2008, some of the greatest companies, you know, in terms of valuation, you know, were created out of that time, in that time. And that was people like us and like people at the conference that are going to fight through the fear, get to the fear, and then find themselves in good partnership around creative ideas. And they're going to go execute against those. And we're going to be talking about that in Connect 2030. Great companies that were formed, great movies that came from this, great series that came from this time. So I just say, let's think a little bit more like the ancient Greeks in this place, in this way, that it's just the time and space before something's to be created.
Gosh, thank you for that invitation into the chaos, into the fear, knowing that that's where the creativity is going to come from. It's a good thought to think about what we'll consider in 10 years from this moment. Thank you, both of you. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for sharing so generously in this time and just for sitting with us. I feel like we are sitting together, and there's something quite beautiful about that gift. So I have a feeling that there will be many scribbled notes from everyone who gets the privilege of enjoying this conversation as I have. So thank you so much for the gift this has been to me and to our community. And we hope to see you here for Connect 21. It's worth the trip. Jason, you know that. But
it is worth
sweeten the deal.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much, guys. Have a lovely evening.
You too.
Bye.
Welcome to the Q&A part of our conversation, and I'm joined by Rod Hopping. Hey, Rod Hopping, how are you?
Yeah, good, mate. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
You too.
We've got a little bit of feedback from the video just finishing there. We'll just let that finish so everyone can hear us.
Sounds good.
There we go. Just waiting for that to close off. Well, that was a great conversation.
How cool was it?
It was very cool. And I know those guys are dear friends of yours as well. But before we kind of jump into a bit of a conversation about your many friendships around the world with filmmakers and executive producers and directors and so on, I just want to hear, just for the benefit of those who don't know Rod Hopping, maybe you could just give a quick bio of who you are, Rod, and tell us a little bit about Heritage Films.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. Heritage Films is about to turn 16 on the 1st of July, so I guess we could probably get our learner's permit to do what we've been doing for the last 16 years. But it's been quite a journey. It's a film distribution operation. We obviously started off when there was this thing called DVD around, and I guess we've come full circle into the digital world. And we do a whole bunch of things around the world. So we do domestic distribution, which involves bringing movies out to Australia and New Zealand from anything from a cinematic release through to kind of direct to digital platforms. Used to say direct to DVD. It doesn't sort of roll off the tongue as easy, but I'll get used to it. So yeah, and just have the privilege of we love stories, Stu. We just really this whole thing started with a real nudge about the power of story in my own life. And we love stories, so we love to engage audiences with great stories.
That's so good. Yeah, and so, I mean, the thing is here, Rod, we just saw a beautiful conversation, a really nice conversation between Jason and Brian, and you can see that Brian is obviously a mentor to Jason. That was the key thing that we took away from that conversation. And clearly Jason has learned a lot from Brian in that particular example. But I just know, reading through some of the questions that we've been getting in some of the chat, a lot of people would love to know how to form those kind of relationships with people that are that much further ahead of us. And I guess there's a big ocean between us and the United States in particular, and of course we can't even fly at the moment anyway. So how and you've got a pretty extensive connection with different friends yourself. How have you managed to make these kind of deep connections? How have you met half of these people, Rod?
I think obviously there's a difference between a friend and a mentor, and that what we just heard with Brian and Jason is a really, it's a real privilege to actually listen to that almost intimate conversation. Brian is just one of those guys who I want to be like. He's generous, and I think when you hear that he's living out something that happened to him as an up and coming producer, and he's treating people the way he was treated, there's some pretty basic stuff there, I think. And my take, Stu, is in terms of industry connections and people. I very early on, and look, even today, I was going to say very early on, I didn't know what we were doing, but probably don't know what we're doing more than ever right now because of this crazy, unusual space we're in. But it's about putting yourself out into places and spaces where you can meet people and not being afraid. I mean, what's really great about this conference and about listening, kind of eavesdropping to the conversation we just had, is people like Brian and Jason. They're ordinary human beings with families. They have sons who have a garage band. Do you know what I mean? They're down to earth. They long for connection the same as you and I long for connection. And so it's really just putting yourself. It takes a certain boldness. One of the things I was scribbling notes just listening to these guys. The whole thing that Brian was really teaching me as I listened was you just don't take no. You can't afford to take no for an answer in this space. And not everyone's going to be your friend, and definitely not everybody's going to be your mentor. Even the good people who you would love to be your mentor, they just might not have the space to be able to do that in their lives. They might have other people. It doesn't mean, I think taking rejection personally is a big one here. Whether it's your project you're pitching or whether you're knocking on the door of someone whose heart you love and you'd like to hang with them. A no should never be a personal thing. It should be like an opportunity to go, well, that door's closed. Is there another door I can knock on? And it's just that perseverance, that never give up kind of stuff, I think.
Yeah, that's good. And these are these are very unusual times that we're in, and yet we seem to be able to, and we've experienced this with this summit, as you've seen, we've seemed to be able to get hold of people that usually are just not available. So because they are available, they're at home, or they're or they have been, they're probably a little bit more released today than they were maybe a week or two ago. But so we don't have to necessarily jump on an aeroplane and fly to the United States to make these kind of deep connections with people with experience in Hollywood, for example. Have you reached out through other means, email, social media? How do you even know who to contact?
Yeah, look, one of the things that I found quickly, I guess proximity always helps. And many years in a row, I would go to America, to probably maybe twice a year to Los Angeles for various film markets and things like that. I found Hollywood, this is part of the mystical kind of space that I find Los Angeles and Hollywood is. It draws you in, and people seem to take meetings, and I just can recount many times where I just didn't think I had a chance of having a meeting with someone. And what I really love about the American spirit and culture, I think it's different to Australians. We this tall poppy syndrome that we have, we don't really want you to get past me. Very different to what we heard Brian just sharing. Brian was like, and he mentioned this other guy, Jens, who is Jason's partner. Brian says, I hope Jason and Jen scream past me, fly past me, and do more than I've ever done. And that's a spirit that we all need to tap into. And and I say it carefully that as Aussies and as Aussie Christians, we need to overcome that cultural thing that Australians have, where we don't allow you to go past me. And so I've always appreciated that you could be meeting with someone in LA and you tell them who you are, share vision. Tell them what's on your heart. You know, this is an industry that always wants to know what your last project was and how successful you were. And so in the early days, I had no projects and I had no success. And so what do you do? What do you do when you're starting out? Or what do you do when you feel this call on your heart to tell stories, but you don't have any runs on the board? Well, I just think we've always got enthusiasm. And so I found that enthusiasm opens doors. And I think people in that space in the industry would often go, Rod, it's amazing what you're sharing with me. You know, I've got a couple of mates you should. And before you know it, they open their Rolodex up and they're making phone calls and you've got the next 2 meetings lined up. It is a bit of a numbers game. Brian alluded to that too. I often talk about the fact that you need to take 10 meetings to get 3 decent conversations, and out of 3 different decent conversations, 1 project might get surfaced and become something that you work on. So in terms of answering a question about how to do that from a distance, it's obviously easier to connect with people from a distance that you already have a relationship with. I'm not super strong on the social side of things, but I would imagine you can build a level of connection with people through following their socials and my encouragement too is you can be an encourager and a cheerleader from a distance too. So if you cheer those people on who are kind of your heroes and people you'd love to connect with, when you do knock on their door, they might recognise you as that person who's been a cheerleader in their lives in some way too.
Yeah, and I think there's a temptation in what we're talking about here, and as we look at these sort of folks that have been a part of the summit this week, you know, we had Rich Peluso earlier on in the week, and I know he's a very good friend of yours as well because you put him in touch with me. So you know, you look at folks like that, and you look at the top of the mountain almost. You think, gosh, it looks just such a long way up, you know. But where we forget there's actually a journey to the top, where we're actually along that journey. There's a depth of other relationships that are also kind of wanting to work with other people to kind of progress in their creativity as well, rather than just looking at the top and thinking, well, I'm just gonna try and speak to that person and not think and see the opportunities around. But I just wanted to touch on Rich in particular, because during the conversation I had with him, what really struck me was the fact that you know, this is fairly recent history, especially with the Christian film or faith and film segment of the market, let's call it that. It's fairly recent history in the last 10, 15 years or so that we've actually seen the birth of a Christian film and TV space in the way that it is today. And it's because of individuals like Rich Peluso and others that we've seen that have really made that happen. And it was mostly if anyone's watched the interview, you haven't, you can of course go and watch it again afterwards, because it's available sort of on demand as well. But the thing is, what struck me in the conversation there was that you know, it was just taking advantage of those moments, you know, finding the next step, not seeing the top of the mountain, but just finding the very next step and the next opportunity. And it didn't always go in a straight line. It kind of went off over this way and then kind of over that way and maybe down a bit and up and around. You get the idea. It wasn't a straight path, but it was persistence in a forward moving direction. And we're seeing the fruit of that today. So I think I'm seeing some of these questions come through, and I'm trying to bring them into sort of a number of them into one, really, because people are asking, you know, how do I get in front of the right person, and you know, how do we get our story, how do we make more relevant stories for a wider secular audience, and all these kinds of questions. But of course, you know, that question in the context of today looks very different to what it did 5 years ago, and it might take 5 or 10 years for a film to actually reach the point at which it's actually going to even get made, and the market moves on a lot in that short time. I mean, tell me, I just want to hear what you think about that. Have you seen a lot of change in the Christian film and TV market in the last sort of 10, 15 years since you started, well, 13 years ago when you started Heritage Films?
Yeah, look, we started just after The Passion of the Christ came out, and no doubt Mel Gibson kind of started the industry of it. He certainly had the studios take notice of the box office results, especially considering that the majority of them had rejected the film, and probably had that Pretty Woman moment where she walks back into the store holding her bags going, "You're on commission, aren't you?" Big mistake kind of thing. It changed everything. And what happened was it changed the quality of the productions. It changed. And look, when Mel Gibson makes a movie, it's world class. It was a piece of art, that film, and it's world class. And so as long as everybody lifts the bar up to their level, it means that everybody rises, that the quality increases. And so the one thing I've noticed is the film quality has got better. The storytelling has got more believable. There's less of that you're trying to trick me here, or there's a hidden agenda, and I think that I'm sharing from a bias, because the kinds of stories we love are true stories, and some of them are very raw, and also we just like to have honest and transparent conversations around the stories that we release, because all of our lives are raw and quite messy, and we want people to be able to relate. And I think the content's been more relatable. And Rich Paluso is a good example, and Sony Affirm. To think that there's somebody within the Sony organisation, a senior person, who is responsible for bringing high quality faith-based content to market is pretty amazing. Other studios have tried and do elements of it. Sony have the most consistency, and by way of doing that, they have the most success. And so when they tell films like Paul, Apostle of Christ, and The Star, the animation The Star, Miracles from Heaven, these films are quality films that get mainstream theatrical releases. They're not just pushed to the direct-to-DVD kind of space. And so it's exciting seeing that happen, because that means they're opening up to wider audiences. They're seen in the same way that another period piece might be seen, or another animation might be seen. And I find that really exciting, because they're not just discarded, they're not just thrown somewhere where they'll land, and the faithful will watch them, kind of thing. Because story is a community kind of event, I think, and shared story is what I'm really passionate about. It's one thing for me to go and, even just hearing the three of them talk just then about what they're watching. What's that conversation that started up since we've all been on these on streaming platforms? We all want to know what you've been watching. It's a part of the social dialogue these days. Why do we even ask that question? Well, I think it's because we want to share. I've been watching that too. And all of a sudden, if you and I, Stu, are watching the same thing, we're chatting away. It's like we've formed our own little club. There's some beauty in it. But at the core of it, it's story, and it's the shared experience of story. And I really love that. Looks like we might have lost Stu. So I think I'm still connected to you all out there. From what I can see, we're still streaming. We're still going to air. So I guess maybe just to pick up on a few of the things that I think Brian and Jason commented on that I found really beautiful. I think that there's that working together in the trenches kind of space, which is really important, because I think that's when people start to. Nathan's come on, but
G'day, Rod. Yeah, we've got a couple of little technical issues with this particular session, so I'll join you until Stu comes back. But enjoying the conversation. Sorry, keep going. Don't let me interrupt you.
No, you again just leaving me on my own. I like it. You mean to say I had the CMA community all to myself? I've grown to this now. Years, mate.
And please do so. It looks like Stu's going to be back with us in a moment. But thank you, and post your Q&As in the Q&A section. And when Stu rejoins us, I'll make sure I get off, because these guys are the experts in this particular topic that we're discussing today. So here comes Stu back. But Rod, Jude Kalman there on the Gold Coast. Welcome, Jude. she's just asked, it seems there's a big divide between faith-based film with a reasonable production budget and the early end of the spectrum where production is gratis or made on a shoestring for a charity. So what ways can the industry bridge that middle ground financially? That's a common question that I get asked, but I guess you get asked it all the time. So where is that middle ground? And welcome back, Stu.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you can hear me. That was an interesting moment. I was just talking to myself for a while. Now, the great question as well. But anyway.
All right, I'll leave you guys with it. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Nathan. Right, over to you.
Oh, goodness me. That is a big question. That's the show me the money question, isn't it?
It really is.
And look, it's a good question, Jude. It's easy to talk about when you hear the word Sony are making faith-based content. You can just go, oh, of course, it's Sony. Do you know what I mean? But I think one of the challenging aspects of this industry, but I also find it one of the rewarding aspects, is typically the next project that you do is a bit bigger, harder, riskier than the last project that you did. And personally, I find that as someone who's always struggling to keep trusting the Father, that's just there's a rub there for me, and it's kind of like I wish the rub would go away. I wish we could just settle. Maybe I just got to learn to trust Him more. But sometimes I wish we could go back and just have less risk, but it just doesn't seem to be that way. It seems to be you've got to take bigger steps next time to tell it at a greater level. And I think you've got to find ways, obviously, to fund those bigger steps. I can't talk with huge authority from a production perspective, just to really put it out there. I can only give you insights that I think could help, could assist in terms of even from a marketing and distribution perspective, which is what we do.
I think one of the things there, if I can just add to that as well, is that it's a film. The film business. We seem to forget the word business, in this. And I remember Phil Cook challenging us about this a couple of years back in a past conference, Connect conference. And the thing is that Sony have identified that there is a market for the Christian film, and of course the Christian films, if we want to call them that, faith-based films, have, we might say improved, but they're essentially reaching a particular type of audience, a sensitivity that want to watch that kind of films. In the same way, there are other genres of films where there is a market. And I'd say that for those that are asking these kinds of questions of how you pitch your film, it depends is I think the answer. If you need to know who is interested in the kinds of products that you're going to make, the stories that you're carrying, the stories that you want to tell. Because I know that some of us have got lots of ideas that we're just busting to get seen by many people, but just like any product that you make, you must know your audience. You must know who is the kind of person that's going to buy this product, if you like, and how do I now find people? What kind of shop would that product be sold in, if you want to give it that sort of example, that analogy, and then go and find those people. Because if you've got a film that doesn't look like the kind of film that Rich Peluso and Sony Affirm Films would present, then it's probably not worth knocking on his door. But there are probably others. I think of Terrence Malick, for example, and I was thinking, I've been talking this a little bit about his recent film as well, and the beautiful thing about his films, I mean, the first thing I'll say about those films, of course, and I'm thinking here of A Hidden Life, if you haven't seen it, but Rod and I, we were chatting about it the other day, but that's not kind of necessarily the sort of film that Sony would necessarily distribute, but it is the kind of film that others will. And talking to Eric Loxmo, he knows the kind of films that his business are going to position. They know the market of how to reach the kind of customers, the kind of viewers, the kind of audiences that people who watch those sorts of films, where they are and what they reach. So we just need to know who are the ones, who are the distributors, who are the executive producers who typically connect their name to those kinds of products, those kinds of films, and really go and start connecting with them, find out who's their assistant, who's their, who else has written with them, and so on. I think that's a bit of advice I would give there. So just, kind of look at the kind of things that they're interested in. You got something to say to that, Rod?
Yeah, and look, there's so many disruptive ways to go to market these days too, but none of them are easy. I probably about 13 years ago, I got 13 5-minute animations from a South African company called Jungle Beat, or the animation series is called Jungle Beat. And I fell in love with them. They were highly entertaining, and we put them onto a DVD. This was kind of, think 13 years ago as far as digital and the internet. And fast forward to today, they have so much Jungle Beat content on YouTube. They have over 1.2 billion views, and on the 26th of June, they have a global digital release in 126 countries of the Jungle Beat feature film. It was due to go into cinemas. There are no cinemas happening at the moment. They, as a production company based in Cape Town, South Africa, have gone through a company who has, if you like, aggregated them onto digital platforms like iTunes and Google Play and Amazon in 126 regions. And so we're looking after Australia and New Zealand for them. I mean, 1.2 billion eyeballs helps.
Yeah.
And there's a 13-year journey there, but that's a good example, isn't it, of the disruption and the quantity of time that it takes as well to get to market as well with your big idea.
And you've just recently, well, you're right in the middle of, as far as I'm aware, distributing a film, same kind of different as me, which I had the chance to look at just the other day. Wonderful film, Renee Zellweger and Greg Kinnear in that as well. But of course, there are no theatres open in Australia. So how do you, how have you pivoted, using that word again, how did you as an organisation kind of quickly flip things around and try and get that to market? How are you doing that in this current market?
Yeah, look, it's been fun, devastating and fun. I think we could all, I don't know, maybe say that part of lockdown, part of this experience has been fun and also devastating as well. We worked for nearly 6 months. We were launching a film festival in about 60 to 70 cinemas in the month of April. And we started working on that last November. Of course, 2 weeks out, all the cinemas shut. So from that point on, we realised that, and obviously the longer the lockdown has gone, the more it's easy for me to realise it's going to be hard for heritage films to get content in cinemas, at least for the rest of this year. There was a headline out of Hollywood yesterday that normal cinema experience or programming will not return until 2023. That's a long way off.
Wow.
Yeah. And so we've had to turn these experiences that were going to be in cinemas into an online experience. We've had to build new ways to market, new platforms, stuff that would take us 6 to 12 months to develop and build has had to come to market within 3 weeks. And it's just, it's been really demanding. It's been tiring. It's been long hours, but here we are, we've got this platform. And so last weekend we did a red carpet, wear your slippers to our red carpet release of this wonderful film that was going to be in cinemas, same kind of different as me. We partnered with the Salvation Army. It happened to be the Red Shield appeal. No one's knocking on your door this year for a donation because they can't. Our film was about homelessness. And so we had these great events with the Salvation Army. We always love to partner with people because we know there's organisations who love the themes and the messaging in our stories. But we also know that those organisations can bring eyeballs and audience to us as well. So it's a really lovely dynamic where everybody sort of has a win. But we've developed a premium video on demand platform. That's a top, or PVOD is an acronym you might start hearing more and more about. And it really describes, if Trolls World Tour is a good example. That's a good case study if you want to look at it. Instead of going into cinema because the cinema shut, Universal decided to do a global video on demand release. So if you watch Trolls on iTunes, you're paying $20 to $25 to watch it. None of this $6.99 rental, but that was the only place and the only price you could pay. Industry rumours, they turned over $100 million in revenue from the film. And so this premium video on demand, we're going to see more and more, which is the window that would normally be a theatrical window before you can find it anywhere else. You can find it. It's video on demand. It's the same as iTunes experience. It's not a subscription thing that's always around. It's a 48-hour kind of window. And you pay a slightly more sort of higher fee to have that premium experience.
Yeah, that's good. I'm going to try and quickly get to a couple of questions because I've had. We're going to run the in just a few moments. I need to announce the Pilgrim Graham Wade Media Prize, of course, because a few people have come here anticipating to hear that, which we'll do. Just want to acknowledge a couple of people here who've given us questions: Lee, Phil, Shelley, Estelle. I'm seeing all your questions, Alexander. Bunch of questions there, Vilash. Nice, thank you for your questions. Just want to mention, obviously, Phil asks about everyone is looking for the Netflix for Christians. Actually, it's worth just mentioning that, of course, Netflix does contain a number of Christian movies. The problem is often, depending on your viewing habits, you may actually, Netflix's algorithm may actually be working against you and you're not seeing them. So just search, go looking for some of these films. A number of the Kendrick brothers films are actually in there, and a bunch of other films. Someone recommended something to me earlier on. I've completely forgotten what it was, but they said, you've got to go and see it. It's on Netflix. But also, of course, PureFlix are available. You can watch PureFlix as well, Christian Cinema. Rod has a whole number of titles in iTunes, of course, as he just mentioned, which are pay-per-view, if you like. So there's a number of different ways of watching content, of great content online. Rod, do you want to mention any before I jump into another question?
Oh, look, ours are all on movieschangepeople.com, or if you just Google Movies Change People, you'll find us. We've got links to all the digital platforms there. Yeah, that's probably the
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Also, just wanted to mention that The Heart of Man, and also, of course, you know, sorry, I totally forgot. When Calls the Heart, both from Brian Bird and also Jason Pamer was involved in The Heart of Man, of course, both titles that are that you distributed in Australia as well, Rod. I know that those programs, and someone actually commented earlier on how, in fact, yeah, When Calls the Heart was, I'm just trying to find the comment here, I can't seem to find it, but someone was commenting on how it really impacted their life deeply. And it's beautiful. It's great to be able to see those sort of programs available here in Australia. That's on ACC TV as well, available to watch for free. Little plug there for ACC TV, who are, of course, a sponsor of the summit as well. So what I want to do is just quickly jump gears for a moment and have a look at the Graham Wade Pilgrim Prize. And before we do that, I just want to mention that since 2012, CMAA has been thankful to partner with the Pilgrim Foundation in awarding the Pilgrim Graham Wade Media Prize to outstanding media projects which are promoting and or communicating the gospel. This $10,000 prize, it's a pretty big prize, encompasses a broad scope of media projects from films, documentaries, television series and specials, and digital media to traditional media, print and radio. The award looks to evaluate the overall media project as opposed to a single aspect, and consideration is given to strategy, creative development, excellence in execution, market engagement, and future potential. This year's award considers projects released during the 2019 calendar year. And 2019 saw a significant number of quality submissions, and I definitely concur there. The quality of all these that you're going to see, these finalists, is excellent. And in the end, the finalists were narrowed to a larger than usual finalist group of 6, and that's what we're about to have a very quick look at as we look at the preview before I announce the winner. So have a look at this one, folks. We're just going to load that up. God willing, you'll be able to see that on your screen.
The spread of Christianity across the centuries is a remarkable story. From a backwater in the Roman Empire to become a truly global faith.
I think it's vital, really, Joe. Along with our guests who share from their personal journeys.
Thanks very much.
We welcome clinical psychologists.
Good question.
To develop relevant topics and resources that can help you find the road to freedom.
Behind the Sash follows 4 powerful women as they travel the nation and abroad to shine a light on issues of injustice while searching for the next Mrs. Australia.
We in Mozambique, we was without no one studying. We was studying first on 1975. From there until now, they have a big change.
got to the point where I started actually hallucinating. I was so sleep deprived, and it was just me and this baby, and it was just so unbearable. I honestly thought, I'm never going to sleep properly again.
Wow, so exciting. I have to say, Rod, I'm just so proud of, our community. There is just some amazing, programs there. I mean, we've been doing Jesus a Game Changer season 2, The Ends of the Earth, as a church. We just did a life group this Wednesday, and we did the episode on China. If no one's seen that, you've got to go watch it. A little bit biased, so good job I wasn't involved in, by the way, the selection of the awards here, because firstly, I would not have been able to make a decision. I also feel a little bit kind of biased because, of course, Be That, I was a little bit involved in that when I was with ACC TV. They're all just fantastic. God of Hope, Adventist Media, there's such a great program as well, and just incredible. You guys should track these things down and watch them. These programs are just sensational. But there can only be one winner, as they say. And it's a very special prize. It's given every year. And it is also the final year, sadly, of the Pilgrim Graham Wade Media Prize that's being offered. And the winner of this year's Graham Wade Pilgrim Media Prize is Mission Educate, Jude Kelman, Fish Films.
Yay, Jude.
Congratulations, Jude. I think you're even on the call, on the webinar, if I'm not mistaken. And
a comment before, so let's hope she's. Congratulations, Jude. That's awesome.
Well done, Jude. It's great to be able to award you that this year. And so thank you again to obviously the Pilgrim Graham Wade Media Prize there. $10,000. Wow. We just have seen incredible things coming from you, Jude, over the last few years. You just progressed immensely, and I just can't wait to see how things continue to progress for you as a creative. So congratulations. Rod, you got anything to say there to Jude?
Oh no, just I met Jude at CMA conference, and this is why it's good to gather, isn't it? Because you form connections with people and you learn from them, and then you see them do what Jude's doing. She's amazing. I'm inspired by you, Jude. Well done, and stoked for winning this award. Tough job this year by the looks of it, to win against all that amazing content. It's really great to see how many pieces of content there were too. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's true. I just want to acknowledge also, by the way, just switching over just for a minute back to the content of context of our content today. I know that some of you may have experienced a bit of a glitch at the very beginning of the video while the video was it sort of jumped in rather than giving the proper intro as it was meant to do. Just so you all know, you can always go and watch the replay if you missed some of that. But I just want to also thank and acknowledge the many different sponsors that have been a part of this summit, especially thanks to CBM and also our friends at Excelsior College, who are a sponsor of this particular session. They have a new film school in partnership with the Sydney Film School, and there we go. There's a little notice there, a Bachelor of Screen Production. They are opening for enrollments for 2021. So many of you asked, how can you improve or practice this in this industry? This would be a great place to start to look at. For some of you, this is going to be the right kind of thing, a Bachelor of Screen Production. It's a wonderful facility. And we had a chat with Jay Lagaya just yesterday, and he, of course, is a part of Excelsior College as well. So some really great people there involved in Excelsior. So I certainly recommend that to you as well. We've probably got time for a couple more questions, because I know there's a few people have actually still got burning questions, and I haven't answered all of them. I've been dreadful, haven't I? Sorry. Oh well, but let's see what we can do. Rod, what's the kind of criteria for a film? You mentioned you like good stories, but what kind of stories? There's people here are itching to get their films seen by the people that the audiences that you reach, Rod. How do people get? What kind of stories are you looking for?
Sure, I love about the space we're in at the moment. We're also in a golden age of documentary, and I think that is so cool, because doc content, and you've only the golden age is brought about by the streaming platforms, and that some of the premium content that they promote to us when you land on the platform is their doc series and their docs. So we do docs, and docs are wandering back into cinemas, or they used to when cinemas were open. It's not just feature films, but we love, and there's still a big audience for dramatic feature films and narratives. We definitely have a sweet spot for true stories. If you have a look in our catalogue, you'll see so many of our films are based on true stories. Same Kind of Different as Me is definitely a great example of that. It's a beautiful true story. Anything that's got that element of being able to show or tell a story of an ordinary person who does extraordinary stuff, that's what we're drawn to, because ultimately I feel like the most ordinary person alive, and I need to keep hearing stories of people who've broken out of that and busted into extraordinary, not necessarily because of who they are, but because they believe that whisper in their ear, and they're committed to making the world a better place as well. So films that actually can make the world a better place too, that's stuff we really love as well, Stu.
Rod, I know that you're not just looking at Australia. I know that you've also been exploring other territories as well, especially sort of Southeast Asia, South Asia, and so on as well. There was a question here from Sherman earlier on about asking what are our views, or what are your views on the possible bridges between West and East? Are regions like Southeast Asia important for producers in the West? I'd love to hear your point of view there on that question.
Yeah, I think there's an ongoing desire for English-speaking content into Asia. I think that's something that we always see is important, because English is such a widely spoken language around the world. Families are really keen to have English-speaking content come into their homes to help their children learn English, and so there is that part of it. But I think the streaming platforms as well are all present in these regions, and so obviously if a Netflix or an Amazon or any of the other global platforms take your content, they will decide whether it's going to work in the East and the West. They'll have those kind of conversations internally when they come back and say to you, this is what the deal looks like. We regularly work with broadcasters in the Middle East and also into Asia, and there are slight different changes in terms of flavour and the kinds of films and TV series that they're after. But more often than not, they're all wanting highly entertaining, well-produced content that's believable. Obviously, cultural things always come into play, but there's a place for a great story everywhere in the world, I reckon.
Yes, I agree. But so we talked a little bit about some of the on-demand platforms that, of course, exist, and I know you have all of your programs that you're distributing available on demand as well, and of course that gives us a global platform anyway, depending on licensing, of course, and to reach into places out Southeast Asia and other territories as well. But tell me, Rod, what do you see as the future of distribution for films? Vilash, is asking that question. Will the future be more pay-per-view for self-distribution, or finding a distribution platform is the answer? What do you think there?
Yeah, this interesting space we're in now with this animation has been brought on because of coronavirus. But what does the new normal look like? If the industry is telling us that Hollywood won't be back in business properly till 2023, do you know what? I don't know how to answer that question, because it feels like as soon as you've got your head wrapped around something at the moment, everything changes. It does bode well towards digital online engagement. Every bit of the distribution jigsaw puzzle is fraught with kind of issues. I can build the best website in the world and put the greatest movie in the world, but I still need to find you as an audience and get you here. And if I don't have the wherewithal or capital to market to you, even just in Australia, let alone globally, I've wasted all of that sort of money trying to share my film with you. And so I think it is a digital world. I think it's about building relationships with the end user. My encouragement to anybody producing content is you start marketing your story from the moment you have an idea. Don't wait till, oh, did we take stills while we were producing? Don't have that conversation afterwards. You've got to start marketing. You've got to start telling the story behind the story as soon as the story is being developed. And you can build an audience. You've got to just keep building audiences. And the more we can get to know who our audience is and build a sincere, genuine relationship with them, the bigger I think that audience can become. We're kind of practicing this, Stu, and I need to practice what I preach. We're just at the stages because of what we've had to do of seeing if this works. So maybe we should talk in a year's time.
Yeah, it's good. One last question, I think. We've got a question from Alexander. He's asked a couple of questions, but I'm just going to go with one of his questions for today. He's asking about the challenges or the unique challenges for Australian Christian filmmakers. I'm not sure if he means filmmakers who are Christian, who have faith, or whether he means specifically Australians who are making Christian films or films with a strong faith element to them. I think there is a distinction. I think there are many people of faith who are not necessarily making films that are targeted specifically to Christians or films that have a strong kind of gospel call in them, if you like, to bring people into our point of view of faith. But it's worth acknowledging that, of course, with a population of 300 million, the US certainly does seem a very attractive proposition when it comes to putting your films out to market compared to a smaller country like ours, Australia, with just 20, 25, 26 million people and a lot fewer Christians obviously in that. And of course, we have a very different film industry altogether. We're very much an independent, a country of independence. But how do you how is our industry? Well, it's not so much how is it different. I've just explained how is it different. But how do you think, as Christians who want to make films, television shows, I should say, documentaries, shorts, closing thought, perhaps, Rod, of how you would advise somebody to take that next step?
I definitely think globally. You'll never get your money back by making a piece of content for a niche audience in Australia. It's just too small of the small piece. And so you're spot on there, Stu, with the US, and you only have to do the stats to work out the percentage of Americans that attend church regularly versus Australians. It's just a bigger, it just goes like that. And but that's not necessarily about just making a movie for North American Christians.
Yeah.
The movies that are made for North American Christians are sometimes not the movies I like, to be really honest. And so again, high quality storytelling can cross all sorts of boundaries. It can be taken out of the language it was filmed in and put into multiple languages simply because it's a high quality piece of art. So I would continue to encourage people to make the highest quality piece. Back to that thing I mentioned with put the bar up, just reach higher than you did last time.